Welcome to GodCast, recorded at Meadowbridge Seventh-day Adventist Church, 7400 Antique Lane, Mechanicsville, Virginia, 23116. Join us any Saturday in worship. Sabbath school begins at 11 a.m. Worship service begins at noon. We hope that you're able to join us soon. But until then, thank you for watching and welcome to GodCast. There's a seat waiting for you. Enjoy GodCast.
Hello, family and friends. I'm Lorraine, your host. On behalf of the GodCast ministry team and the Meadowbridge Seventh-day Adventist Church, welcome and thank you for joining us for this episode of GodCast, How to Life with God. Today we will be discussing the topic of the Sabbath. Is it a blessing or a burden? Is it about relationship or religion? If you ask 50 people, you'll get 50 different responses about what the Sabbath is and what is it about. Well, I couldn't get 50 people, but I did get 5 of my friends to join me today to dig into this topic. So I have Kaylin, Amaris, Bill, Kimberly, and Otis. So come on, let's get into it. So thank you all for joining me today. I'm so happy and excited about this topic, and I appreciate you all taking your time to do this. Last week we talked to a group who were growing up churchy. So they, from children, had been in church. It wasn't all the Seventh-day Adventist church, but they had grown up in church. And just kind of talked about their experiences around that, about having to be at every service and every banquet and every event and everything, and really being forced to do that. And so for those of our viewers who were not able to see that one, please check out GodCast episode 2 from last week. But I wanted to talk to you all and ask you before we kind of get into the topic about Sabbath, because that topic kind of leads into this. For those of you who have grown up churchy, who's that? Raise your hand if you've kind of been in church. What is that, briefly, that experience been like for you now versus when you were a child?
Personally, I feel like growing up churchy for me, it was kind of just having a lot of restrictions and having to go to church every weekend, even if I wanted to go to a party or hang out with my friends. It was more like going to church. But I appreciate it because my mom raised me to know that church was a priority, and now I have more flexibility and I have more choice over how I want to personally go into my journey of religion and stuff, and how I want to live my life as a Christian. And I still do use the foundation that my mom gave me with going into church, but now it's just a little bit different because I can relate to it personally with what I'm doing.
Okay. Kaylin?
I would have to say for me that growing up, it was really important in our household to go to church all the time, every Saturday. And there were some restrictions, but it wasn't super strict, so there was some leniency as well. I think when I was little, though, it was more of a routine, because that's how it just kind of starts out. You don't really have that chance to develop an intimate relationship with God and why you're going.
Right.
So as I'm older now, I've had to start working on Saturdays to keep my full-time hours. So I've had to kind of be creative and having my own church on Saturdays.
Okay.
So that's something very important to me.
Bill, you mentioned that you grew up churchy. Tell me about that.
Well, I did. I grew up, I went to Adventist schools, for 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, in church, whether it be church that my parents were taken to or church that I was required to go through academy or through college. So I had it all the way through. And Kayla said something about, how it became routine.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was important for me, because, I know, when I went to college, I didn't always toe the line that I probably should have.
Uh-huh.
Or I know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was away for a while, and it gave, I knew there was something better that I wasn't taking advantage of, and it gave me something to go back to. And that was really important for me, that, as a younger than I am person.
Okay. Otis.
Well, I had grew up in a Baptist setting, so much different experience from Adventism, for sure. It's very strict. Grew up in church hip. It's called that for a reason. We're all in the numerous churches in the area, and so you were going to church, whether you liked it or not. And to be honest with you, I didn't like it. But one of the things that I recall from my youth is the emphasis on dressing up. Growing up in the black church, that was a big focus of presentation, and so I struggled with that. And it was hard for me to fit in. But as I look back, thinking about my parents being active and they went to different churches, but both of them were active in their churches, usher board, the deacons, whatever. So now I see that I've kind of adopted some of my father's principles.
Okay.
And never would have thought some of that would have rubbed off on me. So looking back, although as a youth I didn't enjoy the experience, I really see where it gave me some grounding and has made me a much better person now today.
Well, I think that growing up churchy or even becoming churchy, which I think would be your context, Kim, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church has some unique differences than from other Christian denominations. I think one of the main ones would be Sabbath or Saturday as a holy day. And so we wanted to talk about that. Before we get into that, though, I want to say that we all know that there are people who are not Seventh-day Adventists, who are other Christians who may worship on Sunday or even another day, and they view that as holy, and they keep that, and their behavior and their mindset is in the same vein along that. But I think because as a denomination, Seventh-day Adventists emphasize Sabbath, there are some unique things that come up around that. So we want to get into that. And the first thing I'd like to ask everyone to answer is, because you do have a Seventh-day Adventist context, when I say Sabbath, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? And anyone can answer first.
Well, I'd have to say the first word that popped in my head when you said Sabbath was love.
Okay. Otis?
Rest, worship, commitment.
Okay.
That to me is superior from what I've experienced in the past.
Okay. Amaris?
I would definitely think that the first thing that I think when I hear Sabbath is the seventh day and God's desire for us to keep it holy and how He's given it to us to rest and to stop thinking about all the stress that we have during the week, and just a day for us to relax and go to Him with all of our stresses.
Okay. Caitlin?
I guess for me, I don't know why, but ever since I was little, the first thing that would come to my mind would be Sabado, which I don't know why, I don't have Spanish in me, but it just makes me think of the number 7.
Okay. And Bill?
Well, first thing is rest, and then commitment, I guess, for what one of the your strongest beliefs that you have, and the importance of it.
So in our first episode of GodCast, we talked about how to life with God. And Otis was part of that episode, and he brought up something that I thought was very interesting that relates to this, and how sometimes, even though he appreciates the Sabbath, sometimes it kind of is like clock watching, kind of waiting for the sun to set around that. So I wanted to ask everyone else, have you ever done that? And why do you think that happens to us sometimes?
Well, I think it's natural to have some of that, especially as growing up through as a child. It's like, it seems like quite a restriction. You might enjoy church, but then to have some of those things that you would like to do withheld from you makes it a little tough. Now, I grew up in the country, which there was a lot of things to do outside, and which was helpful. I don't feel that way now.
Okay.
I enjoy it in a much different way and a whole lot more now, because it is such a respite. It's such a time that you can put that other stuff away and you're not having to worry about it. And the whole day is a relief. At least to me.
Kim.
Well, that's a really good question. I've never been asked that before. I never even realized that there might be a why I did it. For me, I think that probably raised without any religion at all. And then when I came into the Seventh-day Adventist church in my early 30s, we learned a lot about the do's and don'ts. I feel like at the time I came to the church, Saturday was really, or Sabbath was stressed as keeping it within a certain time limit. And I think that I just felt like that was a cardinal sin if you did something outside of that time frame, that 24-hour period. And I don't mean to say this as a derogatory or negative thing, but for me, it seemed like I felt that I got that feeling or that principle more so from the people in the church. And had I felt impressed to study it more, I probably would have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you say that, Kim, because the question I was going to ask next is, do you feel that your parents, if you grew up in the church, or other people in the church have too many rules around the Sabbath?
As a child, I always thought that my mom was being too strict, and she said, you always have to go to church on Sabbath. Even if you want to hang out with your friends, I would always be kind of angry and have some resentment with her because I felt like she didn't want me to live. But now thinking about it, she was really trying to set up a foundation for me. And I really do appreciate it thinking about it, because I see some of my friends and on social media, people that haven't grown with religion and how that affects them.
Wow.
And seeing how my mom set up such a stable foundation and how it's really set me up in life, it makes me appreciate all of her rules and always going to church, because it really helped me out in the long run.
Wow.
So to answer your question, no offense, Mom, growing up, I remember, especially during teenager years, it was really hard because I did feel like that it was strict rules of, well, if I'm not presentable, if I don't look nice enough, then why go to church, I wanted to kind of not act out, but wear jeans or a normal casual attire, because I felt like if God didn't want me, or if he didn't like me showing up like that, then what's the point of going to church? Or another big thing for me too was kind of pretending that I was sick just to kind of get out of church. So I just felt like that some days I needed to actually rest physically. Okay. So, which at the same time I was like, well, if God had a problem with that, then why go to church? So I just remember growing up and thinking that a lot of it did feel kind of strict, but then as I got older, I started to realize that, I'm thankful, I'm happy that my mom still would push me some days to go to church, but at the same time, it wasn't every day. She knew when I needed a break, and I think that was a really big thing for me too, was she was able to pick up that, you know, Kayla needs some time to just kind of wind down, sleep in, and so that helped me a lot growing up too, because I didn't feel like I was being forced to go even when I didn't want to go, and that didn't create more resentment in the situation.
Okay, great. So, Kaylin, something that you said triggered, I already had this question, but I'm going to ask it now. You said you felt like you actually needed to rest. And several of you said when you talked about the Sabbath that it's about rest. But let me ask this question. How many people actually feel rested and rejuvenated when the Sabbath is over?
Well, I'm gonna say sometimes I do. After I get home and unwind, and there's a lot of times where I will get on the sofa in the living room, take a nap, and just exhale, and it feels good. It really does, and I do believe I experience a sense of rejuvenation afterwards.
Great. Anyone else?
After a long week at school with negative energy and drama, having the positive reinforcement of hearing people pray and smile and greet you at church really does make you feel more rejuvenated, and it helps me personally. It makes me feel like God really did speak to me, like, I got you this weekend, like, it's gonna be okay, and give me that positive energy for me to push through the next week, and then I have something to look forward to on Sabbath.
Awesome. Otis.
And I would be remiss if I didn't share that the fellowship that we have here, I think, is special. Can't recall how many times we've been in that fellowship hall talking about various biblical topics and really getting into it. Not in the competitive way, in the fun way, and that's very, at least for me, it was very therapeutic. It's very enriching and spiritually feeding. So I would like to share that aspect of what Sabbath tends to bring out.
Okay, thank you.
I have to say, for me, I feel like it was easier for me when my daughter was younger,
Okay.
because I was setting an example for her. But then when she got older and kind of became more independent and got married and moved out,
Which is what you want when they get married.
Exactly. That last chord. It seemed like that it became more of a challenge to be focused on not so much the do's or the don'ts of the Sabbath, but just being really connected to God, and rest and freedom to rest and freedom to be of just moving out from the world and the cares of the week. And so I think now that the 24-hour frame is shifting for me, that I think it's going to be easier for me to work on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got some work to do with some old habits I'm working on.
Well, can I follow up with you on that? Because I think most people would think it would be harder when you have your child and you've got all these things and you're taking them here and you're taking it there. But then when they're grown and gone, you have more time to unwind and relax and enjoy that. But you said kind of the opposite. Can you tell a little bit more about why you think that is?
I think because when I was a child, I wanted to go to church,
Okay.
and I couldn't because my family didn't go to church. So I envied the neighbors that went to church. And so when I had my daughter, I thought, this is awesome. I could take her to church and show her, because God found me, brought me to this church a few years, of course, before I had her, and that I was excited about
letting her experience church from a baby. And,
Okay.
yeah, so I was all excited about
That's
that
awesome.
and coming in and connecting with the family here, and it
Mhm.
meant a lot.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and yeah, so now I'm struggling to find my own personal walk with God, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
You talk a little bit about the rejuvenation, of Sabbath with small children. I don't know that that's the right word. It comes to mind after all the effort, to get them ready, to get them out the door, to get them to Sabbath school, to get them to behave during church, to everything else that goes on. But it's really not much different than any other day.
Right.
But it's just like, okay, it's not quite as relaxing as you like. One is, they say two is as easy as one. That's not true at all.
Always wondered about that.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this question. Have you ever been ridiculed or challenged by your family or friends or coworkers because of your belief in the Sabbath and just kind of keeping that holy and the do's and what you don't do and all of that?
I speak personally from my experience. I have a job that and I've been there for a long time, and they've respected me for what I've stood for. I work in a business that is pretty much 24/7, and they understand that when that time comes around, I'm just not part of it, and they're not in there trying to figure out why I'm not, why I'm not part of the structure on that one day. I did always have friends, we do inventories, for our company. And I had those friends that would say, well, I'd like to become an advent during inventory, so we don't have to worry about that. Well, it doesn't quite work now. But I've been blessed to be able to, for those folks that I work with, to respect, what I have. And it's important though to take a stand.
Yes.
If as soon as I started, if I said, I'd really rather not, but if I have to, I will. It didn't, that's not the way it was. This is, if you want me to be a part of the team here, then this is the way. This is my part.
I think to touch on what you said, I know that every single job that I worked for, one of the first things that I would always say is, hey, I can't work on Saturdays, and this is why. And they never had a problem with it, and they've always been super nice or flexible with me. But also, too, I think with me being in a K-12 Adventist school, regularly going to church, involved in church activities like Pathfinders, with that being such a big part of my life, I also was surrounded like 90% of the time by people who understood. And so because I was around so many people who understood where I was coming from, I think that also helps build my confidence growing up. So that way when I was older and out there in the world on my own, I was like, hey, this is how it is, you can take it or leave it, I can find another job. So thankfully still that hasn't been an issue for me, but for example, right now I have made the decision that I do need to work Saturdays, so it's just a temporary thing for me. But I know that first thing in the morning, my 10-15 minute drive to work, I gotta have that Christian music on in the morning. And that turned into just being Saturday to literally every single day of the week now. And it's basically, that's all that I listen to on the radio right now, because that's my time with God. Sometimes it's silence, but if that's all the time that I have for today, I need that to be able to move forward. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I want to ask Amaris, because you're in high school and you go to a public school. So how is that context different for you? How have you experienced it?
It definitely is challenging, not because I would like to hang out with my friends or Saturday or do this or do that. But sometimes people are just not understanding that I go to church on Saturday and not on Sunday. And I've had a few encounters where high schoolers are just like, why? That doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, that's just what I believe. Why does it matter to you? Like, if you are not going to be positive about it, and if you're just going to be upset about it that I can't come to your party, then I don't really want to hear your opinion. If you would like to hear why I believe that, then sure, I'm all for it. But if you're just going to be like, well, that's dumb, then I don't want to hear it. That's what I believe, and I'm happy with what I believe. So it is challenging though, because when my sister was with me, she was always just understanding, and we always had each other to know that we're going to go to church on Saturday. But now that I'm more on my own in high school and having my own friends, it's shocking sometimes to hear how people are just like, that's weird. You go to church on Saturday. Who goes to church on Saturday? Just a few days ago, one of my friends was just like, who goes to church on Saturday? And I was like, a lot of people do. It's just different people have different responses.
What about in your workplace?
I haven't had too many experiences. I think of one. I remember there was a Friday evening night celebration that was going on from like 6 to 9, and they, and I was asked, well, why aren't you going to stay? And then I, shared my spiritual beliefs, and I got some cross looks, but and that was pretty much it. So for the most part, from a work standpoint, I have not really encountered any confrontational moments, if you will. As a father, with a child here, I've had to deal with the parental side of it, where I get well, why can't I do this? Some of the things that you guys have been sharing, I've gotten in space, and so you're going through that walk and trying to figure out when, as a parent, you need to put your foot down and say, hey, this is it, and then also the other side is to step back a little bit and recognize that your child is growing and becoming independent and developing their own set of values, and you have to let them grow.
Yeah.
So that's tough on both sides. I just want to say, it's tough on the parents as well.
It sounds like that would be a hard
Because it's not like
line.
we want to make you guys miserable.
It does sound like that would be a hard line to draw, because you are not trying to make them miserable,
Yeah.
but you also want to honor what you believe, and you want them to as well.
Sabbath, or Shabbat in the Hebrew, means to rest from labor. We had a great conversation with our participants about the Sabbath and how they have experienced it and what it means in their life with God. In fact, the conversation was so good and went so long, we had to make it a two-parter. For our participants, their current feelings about the Sabbath are positive. They shared words like love, rest, fellowship, peace, and relaxing when discussing that weekly Shabbat that they get to enjoy. But that was not the totality of their experience with the Sabbath and Sabbath keeping. For some, there were some negative, restrictive elements as children or as new believers, and they had to find their own way to relate to God in this important aspect of their belief system. We look forward to sharing the rest of the conversation with you, and we hope that what you heard has made you consider giving this aspect of lifing with God a try. Don't miss part 2 of Sabbath, Blessing or Burden next week. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, like and share so that others can be inspired as well. Leave your comments and questions below. And if you want to know more about this God who wants to have a relationship with you, reach out to us at mbsda.godcast@gmail.com, and someone from the ministry team will connect with you. Join us next time when we will ask more questions and seek more answers as we continue moving Godward.